Well, hello everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Happy Monday morning. Final week or 2 weeks of the year before we all enjoy the holidays and then come back in 2021. Thanks for joining us. This is the third eVTOL Writers Group session that the Vertical Flight Society folks have put on in the past 2 weeks. So thank you very much to Jim and team for putting these on. It's really appreciated by myself and I'm sure the rest of the eVTOL press pool, if you will. We have with us today, I think, an excellent presentation. The folks behind Levitate Capital have spent a lot of time and put a lot of effort into their sort of take on the current and projected drone and eVTOL markets. I personally really enjoyed reading it. I think it's very interesting. So thanks for tuning in to discuss. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce, we have with us Bastian Janmat, who is Managing Director at Linz Capital and Levitate Capital, and Dario Constantine, Senior Associate at Levitate Capital. And Dario, I believe, is the main author of this report, so he's going to give us a presentation and overview. But first, I'm going to throw it over to Bastian to introduce the firm and say a few words.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. And Dario and I are very excited to be here today. We are two members of the team behind Levitate Capital, like Brian just mentioned, and I believe we're the first venture capital firm focused exclusively on advanced aerial mobility. We started investing through this fund about 3.5 years ago, and the goal was really to help spur innovation and get behind the winners in the drone economy and the broader air mobility space, which for us includes everything from delivery drones to inspection drones to even passenger eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and then all the enabling technologies, which are pivotal and very interesting. Themes like autonomy, ground infrastructure, communications technology, all of the technologies that will allow these exciting companies to take flight. The purpose of this white paper that Dario has spent a lot of time on, and we'll walk you through in a moment, was really just a roadmap for ourselves. As we looked around the industry, there are several very good industry reports out there covering the drone and air mobility space. Some of them are a little bit outdated at this point, and we felt we needed to get a refreshed look at the overall space. What are the different segments? Which ones are taking off today? Which ones are taking off a little later? What are the companies we could invest in today to capitalize on a trend that's a bit longer term? These are some of the problems or questions where we tried to answer with this report. I'll just say one more thing, and that is that we are stage agnostic as a fund. So we'll invest in anything from a seed or A round through to the last rounds a company raises before they go public. And it's actually our hope that we invest in a company pretty early and then continue to do much more than our pro rata. So really invest significant amounts of capital down the road as they scale. So if you're a participant in this space, hopefully you'll think of Levitate Capital as a potential investor in one of your future rounds. And with that, I'll kick it over to Dario.
One thing, I'm sorry to cut in, Dario. I just wanted to remind everybody that we have the white paper uploaded in the handout section, so you can click there and download it, or you can go to Levitate Capital's website and they have a tab. I think it just says white paper, and you can download it there. So please feel free to give it a read. I'll just point out the passenger eVTOL section, I think, starts on page 135. Obviously, there's a lot of other work on the drone space, but for many of us, that might be our main focus. And so with that, throw it back over to Dario. And if you have any questions, feel free to start putting in the questions tab, and we'll get to them after the presentation. Sorry.
Of course, no worries. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Bastian, and thank you to the Vertical Flight Society for having us today, and the audience for the privilege of your time. It's truly a pleasure for us to share with you what we see in what we call the drone economy. Now, if we can put the slides up, I'll start with a vision of the future as foreshadowed in the title page here. I'm assuming everything goes according to plan. On the regulatory and technology front of the drone economy, autonomous drones will be part of an ecosystem of autonomous robots that are embedded in the fabric of everyday life. But robots in this age won't be the humanoids that are commonplace in science fiction, but more like autonomous cars, aircraft, and special purpose machines. If we go to the next slide, we'll see that in the not so distant future of defense, all troops will be accompanied by robots that will scout ahead and enter dangerous situations first in order to protect our servicemen and women. As seen in the image on the left, Shield AI's Nova Drone enters buildings and autonomously navigates room by room to map out the interior and identify threats. Also in the future in defense, advanced fighter jets will be accompanied by autonomous wingmen that enhance defensive capabilities to each fighter squadron. So as shown in the image on the right, the Kratos Defense XQ-58A Skyborg drone is controlled by the parent aircraft and can perform scouting tasks and absorb enemy fire. If we go to the next slide, we'll see the commercial vision, where in the commercial sector, drones will routinely and autonomously inspect critical assets as part of routine monitoring and maintenance schedules on construction sites, oil platforms, and any other infrastructure environment. Firefighters responding to a disaster will instantaneously put eyes over the disaster scene and quickly identify those in danger and in need of help and identify ways to tackle a challenging situation. Thermal cameras can pierce through smoke and see things that firefighters can't. In both of these scenarios, one of the smartest drones on the market, the Skydio 2, can perform these tasks with little to no human involvement thanks to the company's industry-leading autonomy engine. In the next slide, as we approach 2030, we'll see more logistics drones zooming over highways of autonomous semi-trucks and networks of crowdsourced delivery services. These delivery drones will work in concert with middle mile and last mile solutions to get packages to your doorstep or to a pickup station in less than half an hour. Most of these drones will hover and deliver a parcel via winch, as in the case with Google's Wing drone in the left here. And others will land and in collection stations and drop the parcels off there, as with the current design of Matternet's drone. And they'll do this in order to ensure that the propellers stay away from personnel and ground obstacles. In the next slide, and finally, alongside autonomous ground vehicles and high-speed mass transit systems, transportation modes between cities will soon include a rapid aerial transport option in the form of electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. This would enable a commute, for instance, from Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia in 1 hour, or simply traveling from LAX to downtown LA in around 10 minutes instead of up to more than an hour. Some eVTOLs will operate entirely in urban environments, as with the current design of Volocopter's drone on the left, and others will bridge the gap between suburban and urban environments with their longer range, as with the Joby aircraft. If we go to the next slide, with this image of the future in mind, why publish an industry report? Well, we believe that the future, as I just described, will be a reality and therefore represents a large economic opportunity. In fact, many of those scenarios that I just described are already happening today. As focused investors in this space, we have a unique perspective that comes from the entrepreneurs and expert leaders that we've met in the space. Additionally, as investors, we know the importance that timing is in this market. Drone opportunities, like many other opportunities in emerging technologies, have burned investors in the past because the timing was simply too early or not right. And therefore, we believe that in some of these markets, there's an important inflection point underway that indicate the market is just right. And we believe that our perspective in this space, which is unique, is worth sharing with the interested general audience and investors and the public alike. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see that we leverage all of our resources in order to put together this report. Our opinions, our market forecasts, our technology predictions are all formed primarily with from the many conversations we've had with drone companies, the companies that are building drone platforms, drone software, and doing drone services, as well as conversations we've had with industry experts. And in addition to that, we had conversations with companies that actually use drones on a daily basis. So, combining all of that with public research, research publications, we are able to put together a view that we believe is unique and one worth reading about. And you can find more about our methodology at the end of each segment of the drone economy in the report. So what did we find? So if you go to the next slide, the drone economy is quite large, and it's roughly $15 billion today, even after accounting for the effects of COVID. The largest market in space has been the defense sector, which today comprises roughly 60% of the market. And of course, that includes the large defense primes as well. Enterprise drones are, along with their ancillary drone services and software market, are among the fastest growing sectors in the space. And we believe it will become the largest segment in this space by 2025. And by the end of the decade, after experiencing years of technology and regulatory progress, as well as performance and improvements and shifting consumer behavior to demand online purchase goods, in addition, an increasing demand for instant delivery and low-cost delivery as well, logistics drones will likely become the largest sector by the end of the decade. Within the drone economy. So taken all together, we believe that total revenues from the drone economy could be roughly $40 billion by the end of 2025 and can go to roughly $90 billion by the end of 2030. It's worth noting that passenger drones are a small portion of this segment because we think that industry has some way to go to overcome technology barriers as well as regulatory hurdles, especially since it's going to be carrying humans, and that requires a lot more caution than a delivery drone would. But it's perfectly conceivable that by the end of 2040, that will become a large market, and in fact, one of the largest market in the drone economy. So with that high-level market overview in mind, let's take a deeper look into the key drivers in each of the markets, starting with defense on the next slide. So why is defense so large? And of course, it's the defense prime and the large multi-million-dollar drones. But the short answer to that is also because the U.S. defense spending is so large as well. Roughly $144 billion was used on procurement in the Defense Department last year, and $104 billion was also used in R&D in fiscal year 2020. Of that, more than $5 billion were spent on procuring and researching aircraft drones. The US market views robotics and artificial intelligence as a high priority for maintaining technological superiority, and it provides millions of funding each year to the commercial sector through programs like the Defense Innovation Unit, Army's Futures Command, and the Small Business Innovation Research, which those products are funded through, to command research and development projects in the enterprise and commercial sector. But the main reason why we like defense is that drone hardware is an asset-intensive business. Some segments of the drone economy require an immense amount of capital in research and development, and that's just before getting to a commercially viable product. So we think government contracts are actually some of the best way to fund development, so that venture capital funding can be focused on scaling the business once the product is developed. So as you mentioned, it's driven by the whole defense market in the world is driven by US spending. It's an excellent source of R&D capital. And because of all of that, we think defense-facing companies in the drone economy are an attractive investment opportunity. Now, this is contrary to the common psyche in Silicon Valley that defense-facing companies are unattractive because the Defense Department is a very slow-moving organization. That's slowly changing, especially through the programs I mentioned, the Defense Innovation Unit, among others, Naval X and AF Works in the Air Force. It's worth mentioning that historically, the Defense Department has funded the aerospace department in the 1920s, aerospace industry in the 1920s, and made it into what it was through defense contracts to develop aircraft and also airmail contracts through the US government. The federal government did this as well in the semiconductor industry and computer industry. The R&D that is responsible for developing the internet, which Silicon Valley is built upon, is funded through the Defense Department. And today we're seeing defense and government spending support in the space industry. Eventually, the defense leading segment will be overtaken by the enterprise segment, but we think defense money and government money is a great source of non-dilutive capital that can help bring a product to market sooner, and it's more forgiving and it's more patient capital. So defense is the largest, and as we mentioned, the fastest growing is the enterprise segment. And if you go to the next slide, we said, as we mentioned, defense sector represents the best opportunities for funding early stage product development, but the enterprise segment represents the best opportunity for scaling a product. We believe this market can grow from roughly $3.4 billion today to roughly $16 billion by 2025. It's important to note that the enterprise market today is heavily fragmented across numerous hardware and software services. So those categories are further divided across various use cases and industries, as highlighted in our report, from construction and mining to agriculture and energy. We believe a key driver of this growth is and will be autonomy, which will allow drones to repeatedly perform a task with little or no human involvement. As mentioned, like in the semiconductor and aerospace industry and others before that were jump-started by the defense and government sector, eventually the enterprise market will outgrow the defense market, and as it grows, software will become an increasingly dominant factor. This means that enterprise, when they use a drone to collect data, the value is actually in the data that it captures, and ultimately this means that hardware can collect that data, and any sort of hardware that can collect the data that's necessary will be sufficient, which means the hardware over time will become commoditized. So ultimately the software will drive more of the value and the hardware will be less important, and companies that provide mission critical software with their hardware are likely to survive in the long term and not get disrupted by the low commodities of foreign made drones. So that's the enterprise sector, and the enterprise and defense sectors are markets that are on their ways, fully mature, not fully mature, but certainly well in revenue generating stage today, and have some ways to go in the future. But as we move to logistics sector, that's when it starts to become more of an art to forecast the future than a science. And if we go to the next slide, we see that the defense market, the logistics market today is relatively small, and only the leading operators of drone delivery services are delivering in relatively small scale deployments or in pilot programs. And the primary cargo that these drones are carrying are largely healthcare products. So like time-sensitive products like blood samples, test samples, and even organs on some routes. So these are time-sensitive, and their cost is less of a factor, except in remote regions where the cost of transporting something by road will take too long and is prohibitively expensive, and drones like Zipline's drone can effectively service that population. The pandemic has advanced years of e-commerce transitions, so consumers, as I mentioned, expect faster delivery within a day or two, and they expect that delivery to be free in most cases. So there are time pressures and there are cost pressures, and drones are uniquely suited to deliver on both of these fronts, especially for low density regions that tend not to be as profitable to serve. So our growth forecast is a function of the increasing amount of parcels being shipped. We use the Pitney Bowes shipping index forecast for estimates. Last year in 2018, Pitney Bowes estimated about 100 billion parcels were shipped worldwide in 2019, and that will rise to about 200 billion parcels in 2025. So, as those parcels continue to rise, we expect it to go to roughly 250 billion by 2030. Delivery drones will deliver a small portion of that. We think about 0.01% of parcels shipped in 2025, and roughly 1% of the parcels shipped in 2030. And that's how we determine the market sizes there, of course, taking account the cost and markup of operating the drones and the price the drones will deliver for those services. As we continue to the next slide, as you mentioned, the passenger drone market will take the longest to reach commercial viability. Some drone companies expect to start operations as early as 2023, which would be absolutely welcomed by us. We would love that, but we think the reality is that a truly scaled and sustainable operations will take much longer than that. As the Vertical Flight Society is aware of, there are hundreds of designs for eVTOLs out there, and only a few will overcome the large capital requirements and regulatory hurdles to make it to market. The FAA indicated earlier this year that roughly at least six eVTOLs were far along in the type certification process. However, that's just one, albeit a very important step in the commercialization process. And by the way, type certification is when the FAA approves the design of the aircraft and all of its components, so the propellers, engine, control engines, etc. And it signifies that the design is in compliance with all of the necessary airworthiness and noise, fuel venting, exhaust emissions, etc. But after receiving approval from that process, the companies will need to undergo an airworthiness certification to ensure that the aircraft meets its approved type design for commercial operations. And then after that, the facilities and production organizations for the eVTOLs will have to undergo a production certification to ensure that they can produce the aircraft in scale, which of course is a prerequisite to operating eVTOL aircraft in scale. So of course there's quite a bit of regulatory hurdles to overcome. We think that will happen by the latter end of the decade, certainly starting in small scale in 2025 and certainly working its way up towards 2030. Realistically, we think that the first deployment of eVTOLs will operate in a tourist-like capacity. So that's the point A to A capacity. That's taken off from one location, flying around to take in the sites and land back in that same location. Eventually, as the technology improves and as the vehicle becomes more capable, we expect to see the market grow towards a viable air taxi market that will reach around $2 billion by 2030. And after this point, we expect the industry to scale quite rapidly. Beyond 2030, it can go to roughly 50 to 60 billion by 2040, which would be roughly the size of Delta's revenues in 2019. So in summary, there are a lot of companies that are pursuing this idea. We think it's going to take some time to do it, but we do believe that the companies that are well funded and closest to that regulatory approval process will be the ones that will make it to market first and have the strongest chances of achieving success. So finally, I'll go to the next slide, which is considering all of what we discussed, and of course we go into this in much more detail in the report. There are key technologies to watch to ensure that this technologies and all the segments take off as we expect them to. And of course, as we mentioned, improvements in autonomy is very important, and it's necessary for the industry to scale. If we have expensive humans that are operating each drone, whether it's an enterprise drone or a logistics drone or a passenger drone, the market will find it very difficult to scale, and operating costs will be very expensive. In a passenger drone in particular, the pilot is not only costing money, but they're actually weight that the aircraft has to carry, and they're not a revenue generating customer, so you're losing on many different fronts in that regard. But that being said, the first deployment of eVTOLs will be, or passenger eVTOLs will have to be piloted. I think the autonomy will be something that would come after 2030. Secondly, there is an energy storage aspect that's pretty important. The best batteries today can currently achieve about 260 watt hours per kilogram. We think that can get towards 400 watt hours per kilogram, but by 2025. But I don't think that lithium ion will get us there. Lithium ion, which has historically improved by roughly 5% per year, seems to be peaking around 300 watt hours per kilogram. But there are new batteries in development, lithium metal batteries, that seems promising, that can achieve roughly 400 to 500 watt hours per kilogram. And Elon Musk himself has stated that he plans to achieve high volumes of 400 watt hours per kilogram by 4 years from now. That's certainly promising, and that would extend the range and capabilities of eVTOLs. And finally, there's a North aspect. I think most people have never experienced a drone delivery, but if you find a video on YouTube or somewhere that shows a drone making a delivery, and the audio is included, you'll find that it's a very high-pitched buzzing noise that only lasts about a minute while the drone is making the delivery. But you can imagine if there are hundreds of drones in our skies and you're hearing that every hour of the day, then that can quickly become a nuisance, and that certainly won't buy the community support that's necessary to achieve widespread adoption. So these are technologies that we'll continue to monitor as the drone economy grows and evolves. We do think they will eventually be solved, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on. And with that, I think we have about 30 minutes for Q&A.
Excellent, fantastic presentation, Dario. Thank you very much. We've got a couple of questions already submitted, so please, everybody, feel free to continue putting your questions in the questions tab. I'm going to start off with a few of my own, if you don't mind, and we'll get to as many as we can in the next 30 minutes. And then after that, we can send any questions that we don't have the time to get to, we can send to the Levitate Capital team to answer post-4th. So I wanted to start by talking about the market size predictions for the passenger drone market, because I think, based on the numerous other market studies and analyst projections that are out there, I think 2 billion by 2030 is certainly on the lower end of the estimates that are out there, and I wonder why that is. Is that mainly due to a different understanding of when this market will begin? There's going to be no revenue pre-2025, and is that the main explanation, or is it something else?
Right, and what you find in some of those reports that they expected, or they would expect the market to take off a lot sooner than that. There's a lot of infrastructure that's required in order for the market to take off. And some of those reports actually think airlines will be operating these eVTOLs as well, which would actually represent a large opportunity for them, because they could service industries that are not necessarily profitable for them to go to. We think that the regulatory requirements will take a lot longer than what some are proposing. In addition to that, I don't think airlines will necessarily operate eVTOLs on their own. I think that's an entirely new complication to their business. What's more likely to happen, and this will happen as the ranges get to roughly about 200 to 300 miles. It's worth noting that half of the airline tickets purchased are less than 500 miles. So airlines that don't want to take their large jets to smaller markets because it's not profitable for that jet to go there, they're leaving billions of dollars on the table and not addressing that market. And I think some industry reports assume that eVTOLs can certainly serve that market. What may happen in reality is that airlines will do what they currently do for regional airports, and that's contract a regional provider or regional carrier or an operator to move those passengers along to that location. And whether there will be a lot of eVTOLs to handle that demand is to be seen.
Right. And then looking further on down the line, I noticed that you placed the cost per available seat mile prediction of eVTOL transportation at 22 cents by 2040, which you note is significantly lower than taxi and Uber style operations and even car ownership. So in the longer term, it seems like you do expect that this will be a significant and profitable large transportation market. Is that correct?
It certainly will. We think by the end of 2030, it will be probably the largest market in the drone economy. And it's worth noting that when eVTOLs first start, there'll likely be a premium experience, so the costs are probably going to be a lot higher than that. But as we get to more drone autonomy, as the cost of producing the vehicles come down, the operating costs will certainly improve. It'll essentially be robots that are flying themselves and the cost of electricity, by the way, is very cheap, roughly like 6 to 15 cents per kilowatt hour. So over time, the cost will certainly come down, and once you remove that passenger, you can distribute that cost per seat, across more passengers, and it'll come down.
Right. Sorry, I just want to make sure I heard you right. Did you say you think it's going to be the largest section of the drone economy by 2040? Is that what you said?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
It's going to be one of the largest segments in the drone economy by 2035, assuming regulatory hurdles and technology hurdles get overcome.
Sure. Okay, and then the last question for me, and I'll move to some of these awesome questions you guys have put in the box here. So both in the logistics and the eVTOL passenger section of the report, you talk about projected costs, like I just mentioned, the projected per seat mile costs of eVTOLs and of drone delivery and that kind of thing. But it seemed to me like you were kind of comparing the projected costs of these aerial transportation and delivery methods to current costs of on the ground or whatever else. And so I wonder if you do a more apples to apples comparison and look at expected improvements in technology and new technologies that will come between now and 2030 or whatever, how do these new aerial technologies stack up? Or do you really believe they're going to still be such a viable option, or even a cheaper option in many cases, if you also account for the new technologies that are kind of come forward on the road and wherever else?
You raise a fantastic point, because drones are not developing in their own silos. There's also autonomous ground vehicles that would bring the cost down for instance, delivering goods. For instance, there's going to be autonomous trucks, or at least allegedly there will be autonomous trucks. There'll be electric trucks that will certainly reduce the fuel loads as well. But currently, the cost of we don't really know what that's going to cost in the future, so it's very easy to project what that cost comparison is today, and there's no say that these tools may operate completely separately, right? We can have a drone that's integrated in a delivery truck, and if the delivery truck is carrying the bulk of the parcels to one location, it's not going to be profitable for that one truck to carry all of its load to a rural area, when you could send a drone out to carry one parcel to that service. Now, you can argue that it can be, they can use a smaller autonomous ground vehicle to do that, but currently we don't really know what those vehicles are going to look like and what those are going to cost. So it's certainly a lot easier to see what the benefits are today, and certainly once those technologies evolve in the future, we can certainly make that cost comparison over time.
I would just add two quick things there, Brian. One is that one thing that could hold improvements back on the ground side is congestion, which is obviously just getting worse and worse. So hopefully technology can combat some of that as well, but ultimately that's a long-term trend that's working against anything moving around on the ground, and will be less of a problem in the sky, although it will be a problem to some extent. And then the second thing I would say is that autonomy, while it is being developed for large and small ground-based vehicles, that is a much harder problem to solve than the problem of autonomy in the sky, for obvious reasons. There are just fewer things to hit and fewer edge cases and fewer other participants around you. So it stands to reason that we'll get to fully autonomous functionality in the air much sooner than on the ground.
Understood. So how do you see the market for operations and maintenance technology for autonomous vehicles, land, sky, and air? Land, sea, and air, I should say.
For operating, so that's going to be part of the certification process, is not only the ground handling capabilities, like what's required in order to ensure these vehicles are safe, but what's required to ensure that these vehicles are maintained and operating safely. A lot of these vehicles will be electric, so the maintenance requirements are going to be a lot less than what you have in gasoline or fuel or fossil fuel powered vehicles. but there certainly will have to be a procedure that develops where as soon as the vehicle lands, there's someone that comes and do the pre-flight checklist and ensure that everything's operating, you know, smoothly. And that procedure will have to be developed as the technology and the industry grows over time.
Could you comment at all on your expectations or views of the sort of size of the market for maintenance, though?
Right. So maintenance of, well, I think it would be comparable to the maintenance of an electric vehicle. So the size of the electric vehicle market versus the percentage of that maintenance market. I think the ratio will be roughly the same, slightly a bit more, because I think there's more complexity to an aviation aircraft than an electric vehicle. But I think the proportions would be roughly similar.
Certainly makes sense. And one from current news for you. How will DJI being added to the US Commerce Department's entity list, the blacklisted entities, affect the small UAS market in the US? Are there many US firms in DJI's supply chain? I think the answer to the latter is yes, but.
Well, certainly I know that a lot of DJI drones use the ZenMoose cameras that are made by Flare, an American company, and some DJI drones use the eVTOL processors. So that's certainly going to have an impact there. The geopolitical relationship between you know, foreign-made drones and domestic drones is something we've been following for over a year now. You know, we think while this is bad news for DJI, it's certainly welcome good news for the domestic drone manufacturers in the United States that could certainly benefit from the you know, an extra boost to their business, because DJI is a very dominant player in the drone market. But we think American technology has certainly caught up and is certainly ready to fill in the gap that DJI will leave.
Mm-hmm. You know, and to follow on that, we've got another question about sort of geopolitical, you know, interests and goings on in this sector, because I mean, historically, aerospace has always been a sector that is, you know, closely followed and backed by governments and so on and so forth, and you know, long-running disputes between Boeing and Airbus and stuff like that. So, you know, all the predictions that you've laid out in this report are for the global market, or there's no there's no discussion of U.S. versus Europe versus China or whatever, but what do you foresee happening in the, you know, coming 10 to 20 years, whether it's eVTOLs? Obviously, we've seen some of this in drones already, but do you think that there's going to be just as much of a contentious relationship between US programs like Agility Prime and, you know, the UK investing in future flight? And do you think there's going to be a similarly contested relationship between, you know, different governments backing of companies and attempts to maintain dominance or you know, achieve dominance in the eVTOL market?
Well, and we've seen this with Joby has recently received airworthiness certification from the Air Force. We know that the U.S. military likes to be the you know, the leader in technology and to maintain that technological superiority. So in efforts like aerial mobility or, you know, artificial intelligence, you know, that would put them at a, you know, disadvantage if what they view as adversaries are certainly leading in that front. And certainly they've created programs like the Agility Prime and others to certainly fund commercial development of technologies that they see as important. You know, Asia is going to grow. Just like since 2018, India, which previously banned drones, allowed drones to, you know, unban drones, I guess. And that market's going to go rapidly. And of course, China is a large market, and DJI is one of their crown achievements in terms of what they've been able to develop with China technology or Chinese technology over time. It's worth noting that DJI did, you know, historically has made a lot of the revenues in the United States. But we do think that the government is going to pay a lot more attention, especially considering that, you know, as of you know, December 2020, the United States government is recovering from a large-scale hack, and of course that's going to increase you know, more sensitivity towards using foreign-made products, especially in government applications, and there's going to be more of a push to ensure that, one, that the security systems are safe, but it makes I guess the government more comfortable that they're using American-made technology and they won't have to worry about being vulnerable to another nation because of the technology they're using.
Right. It's very much dual use, commercial and defense.
Right.
You mentioned India and China, and one of the things I noticed in the report, you put expectations for number of vertiports sort of per city in different regions of the world, and I noticed that the expectations for vertiports per city in the U.S. are much higher than the rest of the world, and I thought that was pretty interesting, especially considering the crazy high population density in the Asia Pacific. So I was wondering if you could provide any more explanation there as to why we might see so many more vertiports per city in the U.S. versus the incredibly dense region of the world there.
Right, and it's worth noting that my estimates only forecasted vertiports in cities with over 1 million people, or metropolitan areas with over 1 million people, because ultimately these will be urban aircraft or aircraft that bridge the suburban and urban divide because of their range, and so only cities with over 1 million in population will we forecasted will have vertiports. It's also worth noting that in the beginning stages, these will of course be premium experiences. If we look at the flying population today, roughly 20% of the world does the most flying. Some estimates say 80% of the people in the world has never flown on an airplane. And majority of the minority that actually flies on airplanes tend to be in the developed or the advanced economies like the United States, and with higher incomes. And so at least in the beginning stages, it's going to be fairly high income business travelers that will be traveling. And even though a lot of countries may have a large population, depending on how that population develops socioeconomically, whether they use it's highly unlikely that they'll use an eVTOL as a mode of transportation, at least in the first 10 or so years. And I see that it's where I can continue by saying how we forecasted, for instance, the logistics market and the passenger market. So for the logistics market, we first segmented the market by phases. So there's a phase before 2025, and then there's a phase after 2025, all the way to 2030. And we assessed the capabilities of the aircraft during these phases, and what they're not only what they're capable of doing, but what the cost of them doing that will be. And of course, we also outlined what we expect regulations to be over time, and therefore, taking that cost and adding some margin to it, and forecasting that by the percentage of people or people that we think will be flying, or vertiports that will be installed, and on the logistics side, how many parcels will be shipped, we were able to forecast the market in the way that we did.
So my computer just died. I apologize, everybody. I tried to plug it in really quickly, and I didn't get there in time. I didn't realize it wasn't plugged in.
I think we had an amazing screen snapshot there of you screaming no as you're switching off.
Oh, deserved. Okay, that's my own fault. Well, let's talk about batteries for a little bit, because we have a couple of questions about batteries and hybrids that I think are really interesting. And I'll start off with my own, which is, you mentioned a prediction of 400 watt hours per kilogram by 2025, and then 500 by 2030. So there's a lot to unpack there. Are we talking about batteries in a lab? Or are we talking about batteries that'll be mass produced with that kind of energy density? And then furthermore, talking about aerospace in particular, by what point do you see those new battery chemistries approved for aerospace use? Are we talking the same time frame or something longer?
Right. So, and that's as we all know, battery technology is being driven by the automotive industry, and 400 watt hours per kilogram seems ambitious. Elon Musk certainly thinks that can happen. He stated that he'll achieve that in 3 to 4 years from now. So that would be by 2024, 2025. We think we'll achieve 400 watt hours per kilogram by 2025. There's a company called Quantifies that recently went public that is producing lithium metal batteries that are safer than lithium ion, because they don't have the risk of exploding at high temperatures. And they can achieve, at least in a lab, between 470 to more than 500 watt hours per kilogram. And I think that's a promising battery technology that could be applied to aerospace, especially considering the safety requirements for aerospace related products. And and if we're at 400 watt-hours per kilogram by 2025, and that technology can conceivably do 500 or in a lab, I think 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, by 2030, we can achieve 500 watt-hours per kilogram, which would be very important for the passenger eVTOL. So that would mean ranges of north of 200 up to 300 miles, which would be pretty compelling for traveling from city to city.
Certainly, yeah. And you know, I noticed the other thing I don't believe I saw mentioned anywhere in the passenger section of the report is hybrids, right? So there's a lot of companies that are focused on hybrids, and I think a lot of people expect that hybrids may come to market before fully electric vehicles, but certainly with more range and payload options. And so, especially considering, I think you have a pretty, it seems to me you have a pretty bullish prediction of the time frame at which we'll see much more capable batteries. So given that, what is your understanding of what's, you know, the usefulness of the hybrids in the market? And I guess another part of that question also is to talk about operating costs. You know, some people think that hybrids aren't going to save enough money to be worth the upfront investment. So what do you think about hybrids?
Well, hybrids and hybrids are especially going to be used in the world of middle mile logistics drones. I think they're also a great source. We might see hybrid drones before we see fully electric drones. But if we want to, you know, reduce the carbon emissions and the impact of climate change that aviation has, I think a fully electric option, whether it's a hydrogen fuel cell or battery power, is the way to go. I think a hybrid would reduce emissions by roughly 40 or so %, which is substantial in itself. But you know, it'll be I want to say a pit stop in getting to fully electric vehicles.
Yeah, one of our portfolio companies, Brian, is called Elroy Air, and they're focused on exactly that market that Dario just mentioned, middle mile logistics. And they're taking a hybrid approach, and it makes a lot of sense for them because middle mile logistics, you could sort of imagine it flying from warehouse to warehouse over much less populated areas, much less risk of accidents causing, you know, loss of human life or real damage. And so we think that's one of the first applications. It's going to be an early application to get government approval because the risk is lower. Because it's going to happen sooner, you need a hybrid approach to give you the range that you need to get from that warehouse to the point that it needs to get to. So there are certain use cases that are going to happen in the relative near term over medium to longer distances where really a hybrid will be the only solution for several years.
Right. And in addition to that, it's also worth noting that hybrids also have a faster turnaround time once the aircraft lands. I think with passenger eVTOLs, the utilization of the aircraft is going to be important to achieving profitability. And if you have to land and wait, you know, an hour or so to charge the aircraft, that's not going to be an ideal solution. A better solution would probably have to be swap the batteries. The good thing about lithium metal batteries is that I think what Quantum Scope is developing lithium metal batteries, they can charge from 0 to 80% in roughly 15 minutes. So that would certainly help. You know, there's that also is an argument that advocates for fuel cells make, is that you can really fuel up a vehicle really quickly in the time you'll take to fill up a car with gas. So it's competing technologies, but certainly hybrid would certainly help in that turnaround time.
So let me ask about hydrogen fuel cells then, because I don't think that Hyundai has come out and said that their eVTOL plans include hydrogen, but given what the rest of the company is doing, I think it's likely that they're going to pursue that. And clearly a number of other companies, Alakai with their Sky model, are doing so. And a number of other automakers that are likely to play in this space might pursue hydrogen as well. So how do you see that playing out? Do you think that it seems, I guess I'll say, it seems to me that different areas of the world, partially driven by government decisions, are pursuing hydrogen and electric at different, at different funding levels at different points. So, you know, there seems to be like there's regions of the world that are really going to establish a hydrogen system, and other regions that are going to focus on a battery electric system. And it's almost like there's going to be these two competing structures, both of which, you know, the vehicles are heavily dependent on infrastructure. And so if different areas of the world invest in different
systems and infrastructure, where does that put us? So I guess I'm it's an open-ended question, but how do you see this playing out?
Right, and if you look at some of the nations that are focusing on hydrogen, they largely have historically invested in that space and built out an infrastructure to support that rollout. The main challenges with hydrogen is the infrastructure part of it. It's the cost of hydrolysis to produce the hydrogen. Or separate the hydrogen from the water molecules. It's the cost of transporting it or liquefying it, compressing it, transporting it, and then storing it so that you can put it into a vehicle. And if we take into account the energy used in that entire cycle, by the time the hydrogen power gets to the vehicle, it's roughly about 30 or 40%. A large portion is lost due to the process of getting the hydrogen, compressing it and liquefying it, transporting it, etc. Where electricity, is roughly 20 or 30% is lost just through the inefficiencies in that process. So from an energy sustainability standpoint, it seems like batteries are the way to go. But of course, as the technology around hydrogen improves, that efficiency can also get better. And there's a lot of investment supporting into that space, and we could see dual energy sources going forward.
Got it. And one of the questions that came in that I think is a pretty good general question is, what do you guys look for in terms of investing in eVTOL companies? And I guess I'll note, before you guys answer, I think the two direct eVTOL companies you've invested in are Elroy Air and Volocopter. So take that for what it is. And by the way, everyone watching, their full portfolio is on their Levitate Capital website, so feel free to check that out. But so what do you look for when you're considering investments in eVTOL?
Yeah, I mean, what drew us to Volocopter was really their potentially short path to certification, and the fact that they were already thinking about a version of their drone that's non-passenger. As a VC firm investing in this space, time can be your enemy. We can be completely right about the passenger market being huge by 2040, but if we invest in a company too early, we may still lose all our money on that investment. So, as Dario mentioned earlier, I think we've come across about 200 different designers and developers of electric aircraft at this point, ranging from the biggest players like Hyundai all the way through to 5-person startups. And so, where Volocopter was unique was in the fact that its design is actually not that big a departure from a helicopter, so ostensibly a shorter path to certification. And then, like I said, they already had plans, and they've now made those public, to develop the Volo drone, which is basically a large unmanned autonomous drone that'll eventually be used to spray crops and deliver packages. So those were two key criteria for us. And as we look at other companies in the space, we have to also believe that a company will be able to raise $1 billion, because that's roughly what it costs to get a company through certification to market. So that doesn't have to all come from private investors. A lot of it could come from governments or from early customers, basically putting down payments. But those latter two are harder to count on. So the company needs to have a pretty shrewd CEO in terms of fundraising capability.
Yeah, right. The thought just flew right out of my head of what I wanted to ask. Dario, in your very good presentation, you mentioned timing, and I guess sort of alluded to the fact that the timing is right for the drone industry now, as opposed to maybe 5 or 10 years ago, when a number of drone startups raised a lot of money and it didn't really work out. So I think certainly with drones, we see the technology come together. I think it's fairly obvious by this point that the time is right for drones. For eVTOL companies, is the timing right? And part of the reason I ask this is because, Bastian, you just mentioned Volocopter and how close they are, or potentially close they are, to certification. And I think we see the simplicity of their design, and we understand, okay, this is probably what the first eVTOLs, that EHang, et cetera, are going to look like. And then you look at something like a Joby, a Lilium, these more complicated aircraft, the Osprey taking God knows how long to get certified as the first tilt rotor, and then 30 years after that until the AW609, likely to enter the service. So is the time right for these more complex eVTOLs, or are we going to see this, the valley of death, as people talk about, or whatever terminology you're going to be, you want to use? Is this going to be longer than people think, and really a threat to these investments coming together?
Well, I think that certainly depends on the company. So you have to evaluate that on a case-by-case basis and see what the strategies for those companies are. So, there's a company, LA just recently announced plans to be a large supporter of urban air mobility. But, if a company plans to, burn all of their capital and try to get burn all their capital developing a product that isn't going to make it to certification because it's too complex, and that's probably not going to work. But if a company is making consistent progress towards regulatory approvals, towards breaking down those technological barriers around noise, around autonomy, around just energy efficiency, then they can certainly last a long time and make it towards commercial viability. So some companies are doing that very well, and some companies, as Boston mentioned, may not be able to raise the capital required to bring a company to market, and those companies will probably be better off if they waited until a lot of the hurdles were solved by other players. But there's other companies that are trailblazers and that will plow through these challenges and make it in the other end.
Yeah, right. And then I guess as our final question here, with a minute or two remaining, someone said, thoughts on a Lilium SPAC and Joby's Elevate acquisition. So since I wrote up the story on the former, I guess I might as well ask the question. What do you think about a potential Lilium SPAC, and what do you think about Joby's acquisition of Uber Elevate?
Well, what I'll say about the, I'll let Dario, you can comment on Elevate. What I'll say about any eVTOL company doing a SPAC is that there are certain advantages to taking that route that may make it the right path for an eVTOL company, but for many it probably isn't the right path. The advantage of the SPAC route, as opposed to a traditional IPO, is that you get to market your forecast, your revenue forecast, your growth forecast for your business. So that's why for many early stage but very high growth companies, the SPAC route makes a lot of sense. You get credit for your growth trajectory, but it's a double-edged sword. There are also companies that may think they're on a certain growth trajectory, but then end up not being on that trajectory, and investors get burned. So that's why there's quite a lot of scrutiny on just the sheer volume of SPAC mergers that are happening right now. There are a lot of companies going through SPACs where it makes complete sense, and investors get to invest in that. Public market investors get to invest in that company earlier than they might have otherwise. So everybody wins. But there are certainly going to be a handful of companies where it'll end up just having been too early, that they go through the SPAC. They do get several $100 million on their balance sheet, which allows them to keep investing in R&D. But then at the end of that, if they're not commercially viable, then obviously it'll end up having the wrong decision. So it'll depend.
And then on the Uber Elevate was great for the industry. They provided a lot of market credibility to the space, and the Uber Elevate conferences that they put on were actually very well run conferences. So it is quite a bummer on the marketing standpoint that Uber Elevate is being sold off. But we do think Joby is a great operator that would one of the best companies that could have acquired Uber Elevate. So that's a great match. And I don't think it represents that Uber doesn't believe in the vision. Certainly just not aligned with their core mission, which is to provide profitability to their shareholders. So they've divested from a lot of other businesses that were cost centers to them. So and in addition to that, they announced they invested $50 million, and they're investing an additional $75 million. So if anything, they are committed to it, I think. But we do think Joby's a great partner or a great owner of the Uber Elevate division.
Sure. Well, fantastic. I think there's a ton more we could talk about, but that'll just about do it before the holidays. So thank you to the Vertical Flight Society team for putting this and many other great eVTOL writers group and other events on throughout the year. Thank you to Levitate Capital for you guys putting in the time to put together this really interesting market report and coming on to talk about it. And thanks everybody else for tuning in. So everybody have a great holiday, and hopefully I'll see all of you in person next year. And that'll be that. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Brian. Everyone.